China.
China.
Hello, welcome to the Pol Podcast. I am your host, Albert Vargas. I'm here with my co-host, Yuan Otwong.
Hey, how's it going?
So today's big question, has China always been unified under a strong central government? And if not, has it been its most successful and strongest when unified?
Yes.
Well, I mean, you need to provide evidence.
Yes.
The short answer is no. China has not always been consistently a unified front.
Well, I mean, it also depends on who counted as part of a specific Chinese empire at any given time. I mean, you know what they say, if you ain't Han, you... Never mind.
Right, yeah.
As a quick refresher, we're going to show you the geographic coverage of past Chinese dynasties.
So this graphic comes courtesy of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and obviously, as you can see here, we have the Shang Dynasty, the Qin Dynasty, then the Six Dynasties period, the Tang Dynasty, the Northern Song Dynasty, the Yuan Dynasty, and finally the Qing Dynasty. So as we just saw, throughout the history of most of China's biggest dynasties, there's almost never a point in which all of the geographic area that we consider to be modern China today was unified under the same government. There was a lot of fracturing and a lot of just different dynasty infighting.
But wait.
But what?
Why is China's centralized government so strong today, and even more importantly, more popular among its citizens today than ever before?
Though the rhetoric of a unified China might be very strong today, the practicality of a very unified and monolithic China hasn't been consistent.
Really?
Well, with a quick search on history.com, we can see that the precedent for a unified Chinese government was set all the way back in 221 BC. And at this point, this was when Qin Shi Huang, sorry, I'm butchering this, Qin Shi Huang had successfully united all previously Zhao provinces or states under a unified Chinese empire. And this was a long time ago.
Well, see, it's always been united now.
Well, hold on, because after the Qin dynasty was the Han.
United.
Then the Six Dynasties. China was not united at that point.
Then came the Sui and the Tang, both united and prosperous.
But then came the Five Dynasties, definitely not united.
But then the Song, Yuan, and the Ming followed suit.
Which were the last of the great Chinese dynasties. What followed historically was a period of invasion and external pressure that ultimately unraveled a lot of these dynasties despite their strength.
But even in those conflicts, the rhetoric of a need for a unified China was still strong and even carries over into today.
And once all the old school, powerful dynasties came in, a lot of these external pressures, things like World War II, World War I, created an internal conflict as well between the old-fashioned government styles, colonial powers, and even as more in the modern era, the communist and nationalist parties, eventually what leads to today.
And it all makes China a lot better.
Okay, well, there's a lot of different reasons why China's strength, general sentiment of their strength being in its unity has persisted for so long.
I mean, you gotta show me something, right? You gotta show me some evidence, right?
Right, well, we'll see. And in order to do that, let's take a look at an article called Unified China and Divided Europe, published by the academic journal called the Economic History Society.
They're a reliable source, right?
Well, it's a learned society. It's basically just an academic journal, initially established in 1926, I believe, in UK.
UK? You mean as in Western lens? As in skewed against China?
Well, okay, calm yourself, because this is now an international journal. They have authors from all over the world. It's not just Western centered. And more specifically, 2 out of the 3 authors who did this article earned their education from Eastern Asian institutions. So more specifically Singapore. So not from a specifically Western lens.
Okay.
So this article very briefly breaks down various reasons that they have studied and seen as to why the difference, especially between Europe and China, and why China became so unified today, and Europe eventually divided into multiple states, which have the European Union but are still very much different countries today.
All right, lay it on me, please.
So this article makes it very clear that not just today, presently, but historically, Europe has always been more fragmented than China and has experienced a lot of infighting, even specifically stating right here that there has always been more states in Europe than in China throughout the past 2 millennia. And obviously this carries on over throughout the dynasties we have studied, and there's been a lot of invasion into China, not just from the outside, but nomadic border areas like the Mongols and a bunch of other areas that did affect Europe, but Europe was also geographically protected, as this article points out here. So there's a lot of historical reasons and geographic reasons as well for why China, what is more united today than Europe.
I mean, it makes sense because Europeans are crusty and weird.
Anyways, what this shows is that not only was Europe more involved with infighting throughout historically, but more importantly that the infighting that did happen in China, even though it may have happened less frequently than it did in Europe, it was always a lot more costly, because in the end of every Chinese infighting event, like a warring states period, it always entailed the end of a huge dynasty, which was a very drastic shift, a very dramatic overhaul of the Chinese geographic political area at the time.
And that made China stronger.
Well, it didn't at first, because keep in mind, despite a lot of these huge dynasties encompassing a large area, they still couldn't manage to ward off invasion from Japan and Europe, as I mentioned earlier. It still wasn't enough for a long time.
But China's GDP is expected to reach 14,000 billion US dollars by the end of 2020. And according to a study done by the Ash Center, revealed high approval ratings for the central government in China among its citizens across regions. So, I mean, it's popular, man. It's working. It's successful.
Well, yes, that's today, but keep in mind that in order to get to a point of centralized government that was strong enough to maintain everything, they still had to go through invasions from Japanese military complex prior to and during World War I and II, not to mention nomadic invasions from the Mongols historically, and then also parts of the Chinese coast being colonized by German powers, Dutch traders, and a lot of Western influence and oversight. And keep in mind that a lot of the reason why China didn't have a lot of the same weaponized power that a lot of European powers did was mostly not because they couldn't, but because they previously didn't have a need to weaponize themselves to such a degree.
See, a unified, not a fractured China is the only China strong enough to stand.
Well, again, because of all the immense pressure that China was under at this time, especially in the 20th century, a central government was kind of necessary at this point, especially in order to ward off the external threats.
Well, then it's settled then, right?
Again, keep in mind, even in China's strongest moments under a centralized government, the dynasties and in today under the Communist Party, they still face a lot of internal conflict, a lot of warlordship, a lot of people trying to stray away. Even still today, the conflicts with Taiwan and Hong Kong and where they belong exactly. So, they may be strong, but it's not always still unified as much as they want you to think.
What are you saying?
Yes, a unified China tends to fare better than a fractured China, but that seems to be mostly because the alternative is letting external powers divide up the land. Not necessarily because the sentiment itself is rooted in divine greatness or even necessarily that the CCP is the best government. It's just that the alternative is not beneficial for China as a whole.
That's all right, man. You're just salty. That's okay. You don't gotta be ashamed to admit you were wrong. It's all right. I'm not gonna crucify you for it because we're Neo-Confucian and that wouldn't really fit well into our religious beliefs. So,
well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pol Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to our discussion. Hope you enjoyed. Click the like, subscribe, and
follow the way.